You're awesome. Thank you. All right. Thank you for coming to the International Day for Women in Statistics and Data Science. This is session 60. Um, this session is on the thriving neurodivergent statistician in data sciences, successes and failures, and learning opportunities within the field. Frank reached out to me about this session, and I quickly asked him if he could do this for IDWSDS, and he thankfully said yes and recruited all of his volunteers to do that. So I'm very happy that they're here. Panelists are going to share their personal experience with neurodivergence and explain how they leverage their unique talents and statistics. I think this is an important conversation to have that we don't often speak about. So we have Frank Rojas, who is a statistician too in the Statistics and Data Science Department at NORC in the University of Chicago. Samantha Robinson is sick, so she can't be with us today. We have Dr. Christina Kai as a statistician at the IRS in the Seattle office. Dr. David Nichols leads statistical consultations, trainings, and project support for researchers at Northwestern University. Dr. Starnes is a biostatistician on a DoD human performance contract through NOAS Incorporated. And Dr. Jana Asher is a rock star teacher and a strong supporter of CWS, and we are happy to have everybody here with us today. So, would you like to start with describing your career, how your career journey has been with your neurodivergence, both positive and negative, whether you have a formal or not diagnosis, suspect a neurodivergence, a silent disability, or seen the experience happen to others? Do y'all have an order you wanted to go in?
And we could all jump in whenever we want. So
take us away, Frank.
All right, I'll jump in. Well, yeah, I don't mind sharing, but I have ADHD. I'm an interesting case because I wasn't diagnosed until I was 34, and I wasn't aware that I was living with ADHD all the way until then. Now looking back, it was obvious, plainly obvious, but due to socioeconomic status, being a male Latino from a low socioeconomic status household with virtually no educational experience from my parents, and really made that almost impossible to diagnose, unfortunately. It wasn't until my prior job that suggested that I go to EAP, Employee Assistance Program, to push me to seek help, that I actually met the right therapist. And keep in mind that I've gone through 13 therapists before then. And it was always the same thing: anxiety this, anxiety that. But no, this therapist said, "Has anyone ever told you you have ADHD?" And I'm like, "No." He's like, "I think you do have it. Let's go through the process." He's like, "Yep." It's a fireworks. You have it. And I kid you not. And I want to reinforce this. I have the atypical experience when it comes to this. Unfortunately, I wish other people could experience this too. But when I was prescribed Ritalin, and within 15 minutes of taking the first Ritalin pill, it was a night and day difference. I have never in my life ever had my mind calm, collected, and being able to actually focus on my thoughts. And then from that point on, it's been flying colors. I changed careers because I always knew that I liked statistics, but I lacked that self-confidence in order to pursue it, because I always had the mentality that you had to be a strong theoretical mathematician to be a statistician. No, that's not the case. As also some people in this panel will let you know too, that they can't look at a proof, but they could tell you the theory behind the methods perfectly fine and apply them. Right now, I mean, I've been a statistician for 2 years, and it's just been crazy compared to all my prior experiences. I love it. I mean, and I'm using my disability as an ability. I'm using my hyper focus to get my work that I totally love to get done. I am able to communicate with other people, and I have a skill in that I could let people know, like, hey, I mean, obviously not right away, but eventually people will find out that I have ADHD. And I will say, hey, I have ADHD. This is how I communicate. This is how I express myself. I'm setting up expectations. I'm letting them know, like, hey, these are my quirks. Don't focus on these quirks. You're going to get quality product. And that's and so far, I've been experiencing that. People stop looking at my quirks and they see my product. And I could continue talking, but I obviously want to let other people talk. So I guess I'll do popcorn and I'll let Kat be next.
Alrighty. So I am neurodivergent. I'm on my own diagnosis journey right now and have several neurodivergent children. Shocker. Most people who have multiple neurodivergent children are neurodivergent themselves. It doesn't usually just come out of nowhere in multiples. Which is I think its own journey, its own conversation, that kind of veers off of talking about the career journey. But I do want to touch a teeny tiny bit on it, just because this is focused on women, and women in particular are underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed. So there's a large number of women who, especially in current times, are finding out about their own neurodivergence based off of siblings or children being diagnosed and then going on a path of self-discovery. So I think that's kind of a cool thing. In terms of career journey, I initially was in academia. I was in a couple of different academic statistical consulting labs, which I really liked. And then I was in a tenure track position for a few years, which I liked some of and absolutely did not like other pieces of. And I hit a massive level of burnout during COVID and saw the posting for the position that I'm in currently and read it and thought, wow, that sounds just exactly like me. And then I put it to the side because it required a multi-state move, and got a little bit more burned out and saw the posting again and finally decided to apply for it. And it's been a really good jump for me personally. I think one of the things that we had talked about as a group when this panel got together before was that finding the right fit for you is really important. Regardless of whether you're neurotypical, neurodivergent, have any disability or no disability, in terms of finding your place, finding your strengths, having some degree of work-life balance, finding the right fit is important. But I think it becomes even more important in the case of having some sort of disability, because your bandwidth is maybe a little bit more limited in some form or fashion. And so if you don't have to fight against the things that are challenges for you, or you're in a situation that sets you up for success more, then I think that makes life a lot easier and makes it a lot easier for you to be in a good situation and to be successful. So I'm going to popcorn over to David.
Okay. Hi. David Nichols is my name, as I was introduced. I'm obviously a little bit older than most of the other people here. I have not ever had a formal diagnosis of anything. The closest really that would have come was early in grade school. My mother spent a lot of time in the principal's office because I tended to be a little disruptive. And the principal thought I had what they would have called ADD at that point and wanted to put me on Ritalin. My father was a clinical psychologist, family therapist, and said, no, he doesn't have any problems paying attention. He's bored. He got him to test me, and they said, okay. And my brother and I were in a school for gifted kids for 4 years. I skipped a grade and went from 7th to 9th grade, which was I remember going back and reading the psychologist's evaluation saying, he can definitely do the intellectual part of it, but I can't see him competing socially, especially I was small and whatever, and he was absolutely spot on. That was not a great idea. I shouldn't have done that, but I insisted. I was very stubborn. I was actually in psychology. I went through several majors as an undergraduate. Was in psychology and really fell in love with the methods stuff, and was taking graduate courses in psychological statistics as an undergraduate and doing some teaching assistant work and things like that, volunteer teaching assistant work. I went to a PhD program in research methodology and quantitative psychology at University of Chicago. Unfortunately, that school can be pretty notorious for people not getting through, and when combined with that particular committee's kind of dying out as I was in there, and my own issues with perfectionism and whatnot, I didn't finish in a timely fashion. After my fellowship money ran out 4 years after I started, I went to work at SPSS, doing statistical support, and actually stayed with SPSS and later IBM for about 35 years, working on statistics stuff there. A mixture of good and bad. Our whole team was laid off in 2023, and I wound up with this great job in research computing and data services at Northwestern University, where we help researchers of all types with their research work. And I got to found the statistics group. There we have 2 of us now, and hopefully we will eventually get more. So like I said, no formal diagnosis. Looking back on my social life and things, definitely some reasons to think that I, if I were determined to get one, I might get a diagnosis as being somewhere along the spectrum. My oldest child, who takes after me a great deal, was diagnosed both with ADHD and with as a young adult in their 20s, and spectrum. Al is transgender and non-binary, female at birth, and sort of well on the spectrum in terms of behaviors for female, more moderate for if it's scored as a male. And I think I would be in that in the sense I wouldn't come across as too far on, I don't think. But one of the challenges that I had, especially earlier, was just being very, I don't think I pick up on certain social cues and things like that nearly as well as people say, like my wife, who's more neurotypical, very bright, but very socially adept compared to me. I've always had a small number of close friends, not been a big, even though I do enjoy being around people and interacting with them. It's always been more, I've not had the level of friendship networks that a lot of people do. in terms of my career, one example of I think a problem was I can be very particular about getting things right. I wrote a bunch of articles for publications from SPSS that were done under the auspices of marketing, and they had some technical pieces in there. And I would write something, and then every time a new person would get involved there, I would have to train them all over again, because they would take what I wrote, and as you all are probably aware, when you're writing things about statistics is not intuitive, and precision is important, and things can look weird to people who aren't familiar with it. And so they would take these things and they would try to make them a little bit more readable or whatever. And I'd often have to go back and say, wait, no, can't do that. That's wrong. Now you've made it wrong. So there was a lot of work along those lines, and not having much, not having as much patience for sort of a sales orientation or whatever. I'm much more comfortable with the technical aspects and things like that. Though I've worked really hard to change the way that I communicate with people, so that I'm not as likely to bulldoze through things, and to try to listen more and be a little more patient and check out things before I go off. So anyway, that's plenty for me.
Popcorn.
Christine.
First of all, my last name is pronounced as Chai, not Kai. The chai is the same as the Starbucks chai tea. And regarding my neurodiverse experience, I have autism, but I did not get diagnosed until I was in my 20s. It was during my PhD at Duke University. I had some issues and talked to the school's psychological counseling, and they noticed how I used different terms than other people typically do. And they referred me to their psychological clinic for autism testing. And they even told me about the Microsoft Autism Hiring Program. And that was way back in 2017, when the neurodiversity and the inclusion of disabilities have been a big topic in the industry. And so with that part about the job search, it lured me to get tested, and finally got diagnosed for autism. I feel like I am still the same person before and after my diagnosis. But at the first job after my statistics PhD, I joined the Census Bureau because I liked the data cleaning and also liked the publicization of the data. Although the job did not work out as well as I thought, I joined Microsoft after that from the autism hiring program. And it was a great experience. I met people who were also autistic, and we can discuss ways to survive, and also what did we notice. Is that I finally saw some like-minded people. And at Microsoft, they trained the managers and a team on neurodiversity to learn how to work with the people. And I'm really grateful for that support. And I stayed at Microsoft for 5 years. Then after that, I switched position jobs to the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service within the Seattle area. So I didn't even relocate because I wanted a better work-life balance. And I decided that I like the federal government better. And how did the neurodiversity play in place regarding going to the IRS? I would say that I found out that the government has like positions open to the public and also some positions open to the disabilities, and that makes me eligible for that. And also in the government, they have like processes for requesting reasonable accommodations, just like what I experienced at Microsoft. And it is interesting that for the positions I have had before, including those shorter terms, some of them came from autism or disability-related hiring programs, and some came from the general hiring program that's open to the public or so. And I realized that the neurodiversity gives me some more opportunities. It opens doors. It doesn't mean we have to choose one of them. Choosing like it's like it really depends on whichever opportunity we get are the most suitable. Like it doesn't mean like one program is going to be better or worse than the other. It really depends on the circumstances. And if we are talking about like real traits, real characteristics of neurodiversity, I would say that I tend to be very direct in communication, and I'm not very good at social cues or interpreting other people's words. And this can be an issue when people say things like, hey, would you consider that? But actually they mean you should do that. But I use this as this characteristic as a strength by writing. I mean, I write clearly because like in writing, when I can understand it myself, usually it means that others can understand. And I realized that the reverse is not true. So it turned out that getting myself to understand things would be a more difficult task, more challenging task than getting others understand. And that became a strength on like communication, became a strength on the like how to express myself in these things. And another thing I realized is the exposure about neurodiversity. And Frank invited me on this panel because in 2021, I gave a different talk on neurodiversity at the Women in Statistics and Data Science and ASA conference. And this also, the neurodiverse label also helps me labeling. It's like, well, I mean, anyone can do networking, but when we share something in common, it's like having the same interest so that we can get together and know each other better and help each other. And to conclude, I would say if you are neurodiverse, leverage all of the opportunities that you're eligible for. Don't worry about any of the bias or like if I apply for this, would that show anything or not? Basically, get the opportunity and then decide later. This also applies to neurotypical folks. And with the popcorn, the next one will be Jenna.
Okay, so I'm going to try to keep it brief. Behind me is Fritz, my service dog. I'm Jenna Asher. I'm 53, about to turn 54 on October 17th. And I want to talk a little bit about the history of the neurodiversity movement, just so in case there's anybody who doesn't know it and understand how we got to have this session. And it was really spearheaded by high-functioning autistic folks. Basically, the term neurodivergent or being neurodivergent, each of us is saying we are neurodivergent. It means that there's some physical difference in the structure in our brains. And that could be the way the neurons connect together. It could be that certain sections of our brains are of different, on average, different size than a neurotypical person's brain. But there is an actual difference in our brain structure. And there's been a movement to think of neurodiversity, meaning that there are a variety of types of brains out there, and we shouldn't be we shouldn't be discrediting the minority type, which is the neurodivergent type. Okay, so if you have ADHD or autism, if you have a biologically based depression or anxiety, if there's something that is caused by a physical difference, then you would be considered neurodivergent. So I wanted to start with that. Having said that, my own journey is somewhat like David's in the sense that I was not diagnosed early, even though the signs were all there. I didn't speak until I was 3. I never had good social sense. I was klutzy. My fine and gross motor skills were pretty terrible growing up. And so I was classically autistic, but in a way that women are autistic. I actually didn't get diagnosed until my 50s. And that's really unusual. But part of it is because I wore a mask really, really well. And this idea of masking is that people who are neurodivergent will mask, won't be their true selves in a social situation because they've learned over time that their true selves are not acceptable socially, whether it's because we have tics where we're, moving hands around or for whatever reason. And so I just wanted to give a little bit of that history. In my own case, my career has been very volatile. There have been times I've been so extremely successful that I've stood out for it and won awards and became a fellow of the ASA and that kind of thing. And there have been times which were really low, where people are like, we don't want you around, we're going to fire you. So, and a lot of it has to do with social skill and politics. I actually have done better in an international environment because in an international environment, everybody's being a little more accepting of differences in how people interact with each other. And I think that that's served me well in international environment. So another thing about me is I'm what's called multiply neurodivergent. I have depression and anxiety, but I also have autism and ADHD. And the weird thing about being both autistic and having ADHD is that we don't present in the way that people think of as classically autistic. Because of the impulsivity, we tend to be more socially out there than is typical for somebody who's only autistic without the ADHD component. Because of the autism component, we can be very so as an ADHD person with autism, I still have the same kind of impulsivity, but then I do really stupid social stuff because I don't understand the social cues. And so it's a very different picture, especially in women. And so that's part of the reason that people like me don't get diagnosed until much later. And I was only diagnosed because a boss of mine said, look, you got to get accommodations because we can't work with you the way you are, which was depressing. But anyhow, so I would describe my career as having a lot of volatility, but also a lot of extreme success, and both of those things being due to my disabilities or my neurodivergence. My neurodivergence means I can make decisions really quickly in tense situations, because that's the ADHD piece. So I go off to war zones and help people collect data, right? I write faster than other people that I tend to work with. I tend to have better problem solving ability. I notice details better than a lot of the people I work with. And all of those are strengths, but because they're unusual strengths, people are like, wow, it's amazing you can do that. The issue is that from my point of view, those people have their own strengths and weaknesses, and they're different than my strengths and weaknesses. So my weaknesses are around social skills. They're around impulsivity, that sort of thing. Because those weaknesses are the minority weaknesses, those are the ones that are tagged as inappropriate for the office. But I get a lot more work done. I come to solutions better. I don't make the same kinds of mistakes when I do my work. but because the neurotypical pattern is different, I consider those weaknesses, making those errors or whatever. But those are acceptable issues in the office because the vast majority of people are at that level with those skills. I hope that makes sense. Like, it's like my strengths and weaknesses are different, but my weaknesses are a problem because they're unusual and more rare. And so this kind of goes back to that idea of if we're all kind of on a spectrum, and if we all have different brain types, then we need to be more accepting of everybody's strengths and weaknesses and work with them, the way they are. So having said all of that, I'm actually in between jobs now purposely. I'm taking a break and I'm really enjoying it, actually. I'm cleaning up my house and kind of getting ready for the next stage. And I've had some job interviews and that sort of thing. So I will be moving on. I'm not worried about getting another job. I think I spent 5 years trying to make academia work. And the problem with tenure track academia, as was mentioned already by Kat, that sometimes it's not for us. I think it can be really tough for somebody who has issues with social interaction, because you're judged by your peers, not by some manager that's been trained in management and knows how to do that. And so there tends to be more of a bias towards, do they like you or do they not like you? And a lot of autistic people don't like us all the time because we are more blunt, because we do make social faux pas, because we are very direct and say things that maybe hurt people's feelings, but that's just our style of communication. Okay, having said all of that, I think that's enough for me. And I don't see Uma or Huna's faces.
They're co-hosts.
Oh, you guys are the co-hosts. Okay, is that us?
Yeah, it's just us. Yes.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm done. And maybe we can move on to some questions and people can answer questions.
Yeah, there's one thing I want to highlight after we all introduce ourselves quickly about our career paths, our trajectories. And as one thing I want to highlight is that if you all paid attention, notice how each of us were displaying how we're interacting and telling our story. I want to highlight that because that's how neurodivergents are in real life too, in the office. And I can tell you right off the back, I am like that. And I want to highlight this too, because that's where I want to get this as an example of how I use it as a strength, because I have no shame in saying who I am. Because when I was younger, I actually had a really bad breaking moment in high school, because I was creating that mask, as Jana was just telling us. Like I was even forced to create a mask, but I had enough. I really did. I couldn't keep up that mask any longer, and I broke down. Thankfully, I was able to meet some individuals who helped me as best they could, given the circumstances of not knowing that I had ADHD and my socioeconomic situation. I decided to live with no mask from that point on. I really did. I was like, I don't care what people think. And once I got my diagnosis, it made it so easy to accept that I have ADHD and there's nothing wrong with me having ADHD. I am who I am, live with it. You deal with it, because I'm already dealing with it, because I can control what I can. I can't control what you think, so I'm not going to be worrying about you. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't care about appearances and stuff like that. No, there is some finesse you still got to do with work-wise. But what I'm saying is, in terms of building up my confidence, that's what worked for me. Is like I started because I was focused on doing CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, because they kept on saying I have anxiety. It actually was working now because I no longer had that ADHD holding me down. So it was easy for me to transition to it to actually work. So I was using those skill sets to really hone down on the anxieties. And I want to emphasize that in the process of being who I am, I'm educating people at the same time. When I meet someone new, especially when it's about work, I'm actually trying to read who they are and how open they are to receiving being open. At a certain level, I will let them know, it's like, hey, I have ADHD. This is how I am. And they're very, very appreciative. And I notice a change so far. I have yet to meet anyone who has been like negative towards me, thankfully, but I know they do exist. I know it's about to happen, but it's just, it's so far, I mean, I'm doing what works and I'm learning along the way. And one thing that I notice is that every time I have to remind people that I have ADHD, and that helps them remember what ADHD is, re-educating them, as well as helping them refrain their expectations to the work and not what they know.
So Frank, I want to counter that with that I've been in situations where people have been very accepting and situations where they weren't. And I have an example that I had a boss, you know, I tend to interrupt. And at the beginning of every semester, I would say, look, I have this problem. If you tell me, just tell me to my face, you're interrupting, and that helps me zone in on it and stop it. But it's, you know, basically the more emotional I am, I have emotional dysregulation, which means my emotions are stronger than a neurotypical person's emotions, and they're instantaneous. There's no filter to process them, to say, oh, don't yell at your boss because, you know, that's a bad idea. Not that I yell at my boss a lot. I don't want to, but anyway, I have this tendency to interrupt, and I warn people every semester, like, just tell me, I won't get insulted. But I had a boss that for 3 years was just like, you have to stop interrupting. You can't, and I'm like, this is my disability. Even when I take medication, I still do this, you know, and just couldn't accept that. I mean, he basically said, you're rude. Point blank. I'm not going to interpret this based on your disability. You're just a rude person. And so those sorts of people do happen, and you have to be strong in the case of that. And maybe that's a place where you get human resources involved. I don't know. But yeah, these things happen. And so you can't let them get you down. You just have to be honest about who you are and you know, do your best to try to adjust to what people's expectations are. But not everybody's always going to be good about it.
So, and then that also reinforces the idea that sometimes the only decision you have to make is leave and find a greener pastures out elsewhere. Because the whole idea about the panel is we're not trying to paint the hallmark version of neurodiversity. No, this is real life.
When you're in a place where people are accepting, the research has shown that neurodiverse groups actually perform better at tasks than groups that are just neurotypical or groups that are just neurodivergent. That difference in the way people think actually strengthens the problem-solving process and strengthens the group. So if everybody can learn to get along and we can all learn to communicate with each other effectively, we do really great stuff.
You bring a lot of fantastic skills to the table. Like, I've been in a lot of things with you, right? And yes, you speak up, but they're useful things that you have to say. Like, it's a good contribution. And I just want to say twofold. One, I think that as a people, as a statistics community, and hopefully those of us in CWS, et cetera, can be more just accepting of people of how they are. Everyone, no matter what our challenges are. That's one thing that makes me really sad, is that I feel like people are just too judgy, and we just need to accept people for who they are and respect them. And then the other thing, I don't know if y'all saw in the chat. First of all, Christine, I'm sorry I mispronounced your name. But I feel like communicating, I'm terrible. My significant other will tell you I'm terrible at communicating clearly. I think communicating clearly what we want, and especially even maybe echoing back to people who are maybe you could have, should have, would have, like, is this what you're asking me to do? I also think this is something that everyone needs to deal with and everyone needs to help make clear. And I appreciate that y'all bring this attention, but I think they're really important things that benefit all of us, at least, you know, and I hope we're an inclusive community where we can work on something like that. Sorry.
The clear communication that you guys mentioned in the chat, I think is really important. I know one of the things that I've found really to be a useful tool in consulting type situations. And once I discovered it was useful in those situations, I kind of branched out to trying to use it elsewhere in life, is something along the lines of the phrase, "This is what I hear you saying." Because then you are giving back what you think was said. So you're explicitly providing the opportunity for somebody to correct you if you didn't hear it correctly or you didn't understand it correctly. I think there's also some really easy places for accommodations to be made that kind of make life easier for everyone that we maybe don't always think about. So I'm going to pick an example that I've found really useful since I started working with the military. So when I was in academics, one of the things that I found really challenging is knowing if I'm going into a professional situation, what do I wear? And this sounds really kind of silly, but women's fashion is a total pain in the neck and really confusing. So what, like, is it business casual? Is it business dress? Is it somewhere in between those two? What does that mean? So one of the things that I've seen on repeat at the conferences that are military affiliated that I've been to is there's always a section that tells you the dress code. Dress of the day is, spell out the specific uniform for the military personnel, and for civilians, spell out the dress code. So it is business casual. For men, this means slacks and a shirt, or slacks and a shirt and tie. For women, this means slacks and a blouse, or slacks and or a dress. Or here's a business example, and it's explicit. And small things like that make it really, really easy to not have to guess what you're going to be walking into. And it's not a hard add into any information that's being given out. I think too that expressing things like how you communicate or how you process in the midst of when you're in a work environment, it can really be a double-edged sword. But I also have found that it tends to help weed out a little bit more quickly whether it's an environment that I want to continue to engage in. So I tend to be extremely blunt. I also tend to curse like a sailor, which is kind of ironic since I work with sailors now. And so one of the things that I find really helpful is when I walk into a conversation with somebody new, say I'm really blunt. I don't like to waste time with, you know, I'm trying to think of a good example here, but typically speaking, we have a task that we're trying to accomplish. So if we're trying to accomplish the task, let's lay out what it is, and then let's figure out how to get it done. And doing things like spending time posturing, it's no good. It's no use. It doesn't actually do anything productive. And so I find setting that expectation at the outset, at least people know what to expect of me. And if they can't handle it, they typically do let you know, because that is one of the few things that I find everybody's usually pretty good at, is if they don't like a situation, they usually express it. And then, as Frank said earlier, you have a choice whether to continue to figure out how to navigate within that, or you have the choice to remove yourself.
Yeah, there's just a couple of comments to piggyback on things. and I don't remember exactly what Jana said that I picked up on there because it's been a little while. But one thing that has struck me is that statisticians, you would hope, would be good at accepting the fact of divergence and understanding the ideas of populations with variability and all that, because I mean that's the core of what we study and what we do, what we use in our work. So you would hope that that would be there. And Kat talked about, you know, echoing back to somebody, this is what I hear you saying, which is a great thing. And it can be amazing the value that people place in feeling listened to, and by showing them that you actually are listening to them and you're trying to interpret things and whatever, that can go a really long way in you know, in anyone who's coming at things with a good intent, which most of the people are most of the time.
I'd also like to add that I'm really happy about the statistics community is getting into the neurodiversity, because we have a lot of like cross-disciplinary collaboration, and with neurodiverse related to creativities, and people can brainstorm more ideas and come up with unexpected links between fields to help develop and also build better products and research. I feel like the neurodiversity is like very associated with tech. When I first started out, I noticed that the autism hiring program, neurodiversity hiring program, were mostly in the software engineering field. And that kind of gives people the stereotype that, oh, you're autistic, you must be very good at coding. There are people good at something else. And some people even have disabilities that would make it very difficult for them to do coding. And like the neurodiverse people are good at just about every job. I mean, like it's possible to find a job like us. And just like other neurotypical people, it's like there is a difference between the quirks and what we actually contribute. And I totally agree with Jenna about the majority weaknesses and the minority weaknesses. And also, it's not just like we think that making typos in writing is considered acceptable, and then missing social cues are not acceptable. Like there are some workplaces is actually the reverse, when people don't really do well at social cues, so they speak so direct that others may feel that's very different. So like the majority and minority is a very relative term, and strengths and weaknesses are also relative term. But like we should create work environments that allow people to express themselves, allow them to be their authentic selves instead of having to mask so hard.
Yeah, I want to add, has anybody else in this group read at all about the double empathy problem? Yeah, so Kat's read about it. Okay, so the double empathy problem arose, or this phrase arose out of some research that was done looking at communication style. And these researchers created a completely neurotypical group, a completely neurodivergent group, and then a mixed group. And they wanted to see which group had the best communication. And they hypothesized that the neurotypical group would be the best communicators, followed by the mixed group, followed by the neurodivergent group. What actually happened was that the neurotypical group did communicate better than the neurodivergent group, but they communicated significantly better than the mixed group. And from this, the idea here is that people who are neurodivergent have a different communication style, not a flawed communication style. So we're good at communicating with each other. That's why we all have a few close friends. It's those neurodivergent people we can find, David. I'm the same way. It's like I have a few close friends and I can tell you they're all neurodivergent and they all understand me and nobody gets insulted and everything is cool, right? So we have a style communicating with each other. The neurotypical folks have a style communicating with each other. Both sets of people need to kind of cross this divide to communicate effectively with each other, but it shouldn't just be the responsibility of the neurodivergent people to cross that divide. Just because there's less of us doesn't mean that, you know, our communication style isn't valid. And in fact, because we're more direct, we tend to get things done quicker and our communication tends to go a lot faster. And was it Christine who said, I forget if it was Christine or Kat, who said, I hate basically what I call the fluff talking, fine weather we're having today. You know, like there are ways that neurotypical people communicate that just drive me insane. Like when that person who's supposed to be helping you on the phone line says, how are you feeling today? I'm like, what the hell do you care? You don't know me. I don't know you. We're going to communicate for exactly 30 seconds. Just get to the point here. It just drives me bonkers, right? And so anyway, I just wanted to add that double empathy problem is, you know, I think a good way to frame it in the sense that, you know, we're just asking that we be treated respectfully as individuals in our own right and that not be treated as flawed in some fundamental way, because we do have strengths because of our neurodivergence that are really good strengths that you want to have around. A lot of people who have accomplished great things were somewhere on the neurodivergent scale because we're more creative, because there's a lot of pluses.
Jana, quick thing. Well, since we're a little bit running out of time, one thing about the, hey, how's your day talk from neurotypicals, I actually use it as a double-edged sword. I actually tell them straight off, oh, I am feeling like this. I had this on this day, and it gets them completely off guard, and it throws down their shield. And I mean, I'm okay with that, because that puts I view it as, okay, the field is now on my side. I control the conversation now. So I picked up things like that along the way. But one thing I want to emphasize, I know we're running short on time, but there's one thing that everyone, no matter they're neurodivergent or neurotypical, can do, whether it's formally or informally, is seek out a advocate. Because I can tell you right off the bat, because I am so open, I have two coworkers that they're completely unaware that they're my actual advocates, but they're doing advocacy for me. Not to say they don't want to. I'm leading it to do that mischievely. No. They're doing it out of their kind hearts, because they actually got to know me for who I am. One of them, actually, their significant other has ADHD, so she immediately picked up on how I was. And the other one, because there is one thing that my ADHD really affects me really bad, is my communication. Even though I can describe my communication with others really well, as in like setting up expectations. But if you're asking me to write something, yeah, that's going to take hours, drafts, because I cannot write well at all. It's been the crux of my career, unfortunately. I have horrible syntax. I can't put the reader perspective in my head. Because as soon as I become hyper-focused, that's gone. I just write.
I think we all have different strengths and weaknesses. I'm actually a really good writer, but you probably have actually more social skill than I do. I am completely blind to social situations. So
took me a very, 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 very long time to understand that when somebody asks you, how's it going? They don't really necessarily want to know that. They want you to say, fine, how are you? It's just like, you know, it really is just an elongated hello, not not an actually sincere question. And so yeah.
actually, for a long time before I got better about it, I tended to consider neurotypical people kind of dishonest. because, and I realize now it's just, this is the practice. How are you? I'm fine. How are you? You know, that this is like this extended hello, but I'm like, you didn't really want to ask me. Why did you ask me? It was like, you know, so, I mean, that from our point of view, because we're so blunt and direct, it can seem pretty dishonest for somebody to kind of couch things in a language that we don't understand, or in a social way that we don't understand. And I've learned to not be quite so biased about that, and understand that people have different styles, but it took me a while.
Well, and there's a lot of cultural variation in that too. My family actually is from the southern United States, though I've lived most of my life in the north, and really a Midwesterner pretty much. But you know, I have a lot of relatives from the south, and my wife grew up in the south, and you know, there's an awful lot more verbal beating around the bush and you know, quasi pseudo diplomacy or whatever around all sorts of communication that you know, it's much harder for me to deal with than you know, just.
I have a shared experience with David on the Southern background and communication style, which I think, Jana, you mentioned you've had a lot more success internationally. I think that there is definitely regional or cultural differences that impact all of the things that we've hit on. And then the other thing, I mentioned this in the chat, but I wanted to say it out loud. I really strongly agree with Frank's comment about how important developing advocates is. You know, I think both from the having somebody to have your back, from having somebody to help you, and hopefully it's not a one-way street. Hopefully it can be something that can be a mutually beneficial relationship, or maybe if you can't be an advocate back for the person who's yours, maybe you can be an advocate for someone else. Because if we all try to operate in a vacuum, it really doesn't work well for anyone. So if we can all approach things from we have an end goal that we need to get to, let's all try to help each other get there. That I think ends up being the greatest success situation.
I appreciate all of you being here. We have like a minute and then the last keynote speaker starts. Thank you, Jana, for joining us from your car with your lovely dog. I really, really, really appreciate it that y'all put yourselves out there and came to do this for us. Thank you so much for coming, and I do hope to stay in touch. And Frank, thank you for accepting my invitation and cooperating to make this happen.
You're very welcome.
At the last minute when I'm like, hey, I have an idea. All right. Thank you all very much. I appreciate you.